Welcome back to Famous Faces, where I catch up with some of the people who influence some of the people we work with and lots more. And today, an old friend. We've worked together for probably longer than I would like to admit. And that's why he looks so much younger than I do. And welcome, Bongani Bingwa.
Thank you very much. I don't know. I think the graying belies that kind comment. Thank you.
Well, I noticed that. I thought you'd gone out and had highlights done. Bongani, we know you best from the breakfast show on 702. Seems like you've been there forever, but you probably haven't. When did you? Because you had a short spell, an earlier incarnation at the station, then you came back. How long have you been back now? A couple of years?
Gosh, no. Time flies when you're having fun, right? I've been back formally at the station since 2017. I've been hosting breakfast since the start of 2018, so it's a good full 6 years
That's
doing 702 breakfast.
that's incredible. I think a lot of people, I mean, we're so used to hearing you and seeing you on Carte Blanche. Um, how did you start out? Did you always want to be in broadcasting, or did you ever have a real job?
Um, well, I was the kind of guy at school who always got into trouble for talking, go figure. And I have done many detours to come this route. I studied politics. And at one point, in fact, when I went to university for the first time, I thought I wanted to be an English teacher because I was so madly in love with my English teacher intellectually. And in fact, I often tell people a story about bumping into her at the Cinema Nouveau many years, many years after I completed matric, possibly 20 or so. And I was so thrilled that I was still seeing the kinds of films that she would have approved of. So I thought I was going to become a teacher. At university, I got involved with a religious group. And so I eventually went into full-time ministry as a preacher, wanting to be an evangelist. That didn't work out so well. And then many years later, I started my broadcasting career at 702 as an overnight newsreader. And the rest is history.
But how did you move from that to getting a slot? I guess the overnight shift is usually where most broadcasters start. We call it the graveyard shift, don't we, in the industry? And for obvious
Yes,
reasons.
indeed. Yes,
But
indeed. I started as a newsreader on 702, but obviously I wanted to get into programming, and I really got a chance within really a couple of months to do that. So I was hosting the early breakfast show, and then eventually, after about a year or so, I was offered my own show, the evening show, Talk at 9. And in a sense, that was also the show that many of the well-known faces or voices of the station cut their teeth on, from John Robbie to Ridi Tlabi. So that's the show I did. And then within about a year of that, the opportunity to audition for Carte Blanche came up. And obviously, I mean, I'd watched the program really since I was in early high school. And so when that opportunity came up, I grabbed it with both hands. And I was at Carte Blanche for 11 years before returning to the station again.
that's not, let's talk about that a little. That's not exactly all glamour and fun, is it? Because what we see in a 8-minute clip, or how long is your average feature?
10 minutes?
10 minutes. What we see in that, how long does it take to get everything together before it's edited and finessed?
Well, I mean, it was an entire process because we would sit in editorial meetings where stories would be proposed. And so we'd be sitting in the meeting that commissioned the story. And so you followed the journey really from the idea stage when a producer said, let's do a story on famous faces. And questions would be asked in the meeting. Well, who would we speak to? Well, we might interview one Stuart Lee, for example, or many of the talent that are available at Famous Faces. I'm being facetious, but I think you get my
Sure.
point.
Yeah.
And once the story then would be commissioned, depending on the type of story it would be, if it was an investigative, for example, we would then sit with a team of researchers and the producer and would almost play devil's advocate. And so once you'd sifted through the material, Remember, I'm the on-camera journalist, so I'm going to be the one interviewing Stuart Lee, who might be a subject expert, depending on what we're talking about. And so I would plug all the holes I could find in the research, trying to anticipate what my subject will say. And so it's an entire process, even before we get to the date where I'm sitting across from you to interview you. And as you say, 10-minute piece. So we might conduct an hour-long interview, which is going to be whittled down to that 10 minutes, including other voices, other perspectives, pieces to camera, overlay, that kind of thing. And so in a sense, it really was a space to grow enormously. I don't think I'd be half the broadcaster I was had I not been given the chance to work on Carte Blanche in that way. Because as I say, the process was very, very lengthy. It was exhaustive in many ways because we considered all angles. And even after the story was edited and put together, we would still be sitting in viewings with the editorial team. There might be questions about, well, why didn't you ask that? Or I might say, hang on, to the producer, why did you not include this element of the interview or of the story? We'd sit with our lawyers, our legal team, who would be sifting through whether or not we could defend. What evidence did we have for making this or that assertion? So it was an incredibly meticulous process that formulated a lot of my thinking as a journalist today.
And also obviously very time consuming. But I mean, what a great school to go to. I mean, how many people will get the opportunity? So many people end up on radio because they did the night shift, they did the graveyard shift, and suddenly somebody's sick in the morning. The breakfast show doesn't turn up, so the early morning guy stays on.
I think the music radio probably has more stories like that. You asked me earlier, I mean, I always wanted to do what I'm doing, but for a long time, I was aware that I needed the miles. I needed to have been around, to have seen things, to have observed things, because I think part of the magic of opinion radio is listening to a host who's got some of the detail at their fingertips in an anecdotal way. They can say, I was there in the aftermath of, say, Marikana. I'm thinking about that because it was the anniversary just the other day. I remember, for example, the first time Jacob Zuma came to the Hill in the days directly after the shooting. And I remember when he addressed the crowd, who were very, very hostile, because, of course, he was the commander-in-chief. It was ultimately his police officers that had fired. I know everybody focuses on the concomitant action that Cyril Ramaphosa said in that letter, but Jacob Zuma was the commander-in-chief. How would he be received by this crowd that had lost friends and comrades over a wage dispute? It was the biggest massacre by security forces in the democratic era. I can tell that story because I was there. I can tell you how that crowd responded because I was there. There are many people who do what I do, possibly even better than I. But I think each of us tries to have a uniqueness that is about what we know, what we saw, and that's the connection that I think our listeners look for.
I grew up in TV and radio many moons ago, and in those days it was verboten for a talk show host to have an opinion. So those days it was always you'll sit on the fence and you'll get opinions from both sides of the fence. It's not the way anymore, is it?
Again, it depends. We're a commercial station, so our mandate is slightly different. I think what you're describing might very well work for the public broadcaster, for example. But we're essentially opinion radio. I have a view. Part of the dare is that we can engage with each other. I might change your mind, and I'm okay with you changing mine. But we're learning together, we're growing together. It's personality-driven radio. And that doesn't mean that undue biases are okay, but it certainly means we have to be fair. We have to try and to be balanced, but I don't think there's such a thing as objectivity in any human being.
I sat in an office at 702 for a couple of years, and after every show, there was always a post-mortem. What was good, what was bad, and that was right across the group. So the same things would happen at Highveld as it was, 947. And sometimes I got to be in on those. What's the kind of discussion that goes on when the management opinion, and that is often tainted or informed by the commercial sense? If you've slagged off X Bank, and X Bank is a big advertiser, I mean, where does editorial reign over commercial considerations?
Zero. None
Good.
whatsoever.
Really?
Management has no idea on any given day what I'm going to do. I think there might be questions about the process. I think there might be questions if perhaps I have been unduly critical, and we might examine that with a commercial partner. We might examine that with a political office bearer. It doesn't matter who it is. It's less about who I criticized and much more about, was that criticism fair? Was it balanced? But beyond that, management absolutely does not interfere.
And will they support you? I mean, if it goes to court or it goes to the BCCSA, they'll be in your
Yeah,
corner.
to the hilt. You can't, as a host, have the confidence. I mean, I'm sort of trending even as we're speaking today, because I've upset the good folks at Operation Dudula by calling them a vigilante group, which is precisely what they are. And they're now going to, they've given me an ultimatum: apologize, or we will demand that the station fire you. There was a time, I think they got something like 50,000 signatures, supposedly, on X, formerly known as Twitter. One, of course, doesn't know if those were real signatures or bots. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that an opinion radio host dreams about. Who wants to be the host? No one,
Here's about
anyone ignores.
what?
But to your question,
Yeah.
management absolutely backs me to the hilt, because again, all those processes are in place. Was it fair comment? Was it evidence-based? Can you reason it out? Can you justify it? And I think I can.
I've spoken to you about this when we've had coffee or lunch, and I've often said to you, how does it not get the better of you? I mean, in the dark days of this country, when really so much seems hopeless, caused by whatever, load shedding or the water problems or whatever, a psychologist can go and get, de-psychologized. They can have a cleansing process. How do you not let it get you down when you're doing 3 hours of it every single day? I get down about it, and mine's a casual passing interest. Well, slightly more than that, but you know what I mean.
I throw the bones, I speak to the ancestors. Look, firstly, here's an interesting thing. Opinion radio around the world is typically grievance radio. It's typically driven by conservative hosts who remember a fonder time when things were grander, kinder, make the world great again, if you will. What makes it really, really interesting in South Africa, we are in a society that has transformed dramatically from what it was 30 years ago. And our current issues notwithstanding, the vast majority of South Africans would say things are better now than they were 30 years ago. And so we don't have the kind of grievances you might experience in countries that have remained relatively the same for 50, 60 years. We don't have the same kind of grievances you might expect in countries that have an almost monolithic culture, where perhaps even one language is spoken. We're a diverse country. We're this melting pot of cultures, of languages, of people from all sorts of backgrounds, and who have different ways of looking at the world. And so it's difficult to do grievance radio when everyone looks back and says, well, things aren't what they could be, but we've certainly seen a lot worse before. And so I think what we try to do, or what I try to do certainly, is to center the conversation not just about what people think of the world, but how people walk through this world. And so a lot of our conversations are centered around people's personal experiences. And Stuart, I mean, I could ask you this question. What is everyone's favorite subject? Themselves.
Second favorite. No, you're
They
absolutely right. Get them
they are the
talking.
foremost expert on themselves, on the history. They can tell you the sounds, the smells, what it felt like, their responses, what they were thinking, their observations. And no one can dare say they are wrong. And so we center a lot of the conversations around people's experiences. And what that has done in a very transformative way, without stating it in an obvious way, it has made people think, hang on, you've got the same problems I do. You've got the same struggles that I do with raising your children, with paying off your debts, with seeking that promotion, with health, with parents, aging parents that perhaps you struggle to take care of. And so, of course, whilst the politics matter and we care about the streetlights and the potholes and whether we have electricity or clean water in our taps, many of us we're in the same boat. And I think that's what makes our brand of opinion radio so different from elsewhere in the world.
I think what it also does, and I can remember talking when I worked there all those years ago, talking to people like Rena Brumberg, Stan Katz, about doing stuff for the community. And it was in those days, I think I was probably managing one of the first walk the talks, or whatever it was called, the 702 Fun Run, I think, Fun Day, something like that. And by getting involved in the community, you do endear yourself. They believe that they can ask you for help when they need it, and then that they can trust you for what you say by and large. And I think that's a warm thing that your station does, and the others in your group. They win the hearts and minds.
Yeah, I mean, it's the hallmark of what the station has been known for over, what is it now, almost 40 years, and it's an incredible record because whether the station is a music station, regardless of who is, on the lineup, that sense of being rooted in this community, that sense of being able to use the power of the platform to change things, to get things done, to fight for the little guy, to say, well, hang on, we'll take that up. I mean, one of the things I'm doing on my show, for example, is I'm working hard at not just addressing issues, but telling those issues through personal narratives. And so, for example, just the other day, we were talking about the intersection between teenage pregnancy, which is a real, epidemic in South Africa. We've got children as young as 10 years old giving birth. It's a real problem. That obviously then leads to poverty, particularly for the girls, because as you will know, often the boys are able to continue with their lives. Theirs are not disrupted in the same way. So I did a story the other day of a 35-year-old grandmother. She's certainly in her mid-30s. She's a grandmother. She lives in a household of 11 other human beings, all of whom are her descendants. Two of them are also mothers in this household. She's in her mid-30s. Her eldest daughter is 19 and has 2 kids of her own. The youngest mother in the household is 14 years old and has a 1-year-old. Now, if you do the maths, you can imagine at what age she might have fallen pregnant. So that story addresses that issue, that topic. And by putting it out there, the responses from the audience were absolutely incredible, including, of course, job offers, grocery vouchers, even a medical aid scheme came forward and said, we will make sure that all the little children in that household are inoculated. So it wasn't just a once-off solution where perhaps they're given food or hampers. The two adults in the household, the two oldest mothers, now have employment because of the responses of the audience. We've done many others where, for example, one chap was beaten to near death by the so-called crime prevention wardens in Gauteng and needed exhaustive urology surgery. And the public hospitals had queues, to Timbuktu. And we put that story out there. And the urology hospital in Pretoria, the CEO phoned, and within a day, his surgery, he'd gone in for surgery. And he's been in recovery and is able to pick up the pieces of his life. And so what the platform does is we don't solve people's problems, but we say to our listener, to our audience, whose story, beyond the problem, their story could be your story. The other day, I interviewed an actor who's well known, who was on one of the leading daily drama television series.
I saw it.
Until he was unemployed.
And he had no food.
Years ago. That's a way of telling the faces behind the unemployment figures. And unlike many people, he can't deal with the changes in his life anonymously. He doesn't have that veil. When he gets into a taxi, people are torn between the celebrity they remember and the man in front of them.
And there's also an educational element, because there's so many people just don't know about this stuff. And here it is. I had to take a drive on Saturday to an area I've never been to before. And I just thought, there, but for the grace of God, it was a shock to my system. And it was not half an hour from where I live. And I just thought, yeah, big humble wake up call.
And so when we tell these stories, there is a sense that we have to get it right for all of us. And whilst, of course, I would never, ever justify criminality, but, there's a reason stories like Les Miserables still resonate with people all these years later, because any of us could be stealing that loaf of bread, given the right set of circumstances. And so we have to get it right for all of us.
Now I'd like to swing the conversation completely into another part of your life, and that's probably where we engage the most. And that is as the professional MC, the facilitator, the program director on a corporate stage. You are as good as any of the best. You bring something to the event that just resonates with any audience. What goes through your head? We give you a call and say, fancy doing this one, it's on this date, this time, this client. What's your first consideration? And then how do you prepare for it?
Part of what I think works is that I can't remember any proposal that famous faces have sent my way that wasn't a fit. And so I think firstly, which clients and which events
will work,
would suit my particular skill set.
Sure.
So I think that's probably the biggest tick, even though I'm not involved in how you select what you think I could be right for. But by the time you come to me, it makes sense that it would work. So the fit has to be right. I always say the best description I have for what I do, I get paid to learn. Just think about it. I mean, is there a better gig in the world? I get paid to learn. I'm often at these conferences and there are sometimes international speakers or dynamic local speakers, and I would probably pay to listen to some of them. And that's what I mean by the fit. I want to be there, right? I want to learn from this author or that CEO or that thought leader. And I get to meet them. And at times I interact with them. I get to pick their brain. I get to understand an issue, a topic, a subject in a way that I would not otherwise. And so whether I'm on the radio or I am, in that kind of environment, I get paid to learn. of course, the other opportunity these things present is that it's an interface with the people that listen to my show, the people I speak to on my show. So some of these CEOs that I introduce, there's usually a well-established rapport because I've spoken to them before. I know a lot of the issues their businesses are facing, the environment in which they're operating. And so that synergy is there from the get-go.
There's always a briefing. It's a meeting, or whether it's on Zoom or Teams or in person, much more electronic these days. You know what their objectives are. What do you want out of this event? And I guess in the same way when you're doing carte blanche, you know what the finished product needs to look or feel like, or the answers it needs to have provided. And it's the same when you're on the radio. You don't want to speak to Julius Malema without coming out with something that the audience wants to hear, whether they like it or not. But you've got to you've got to provoke to get the answers you need, which answer the questions that the everyman, every woman would want to hear the answers up to.
And those are very different things, by the way. The answers I want and the answers the audience may want are not the same thing.
And you don't know.
And so one of the lessons I have learned in my career is that I could win the fight. I could take you on. I could show you up as uninformed, incompetent, but actually the listener wants to know, when will that pothole be fixed? When will the lights come on? What does this mean for my child and their education? What investments should I be making? Should I buy that property in this city? What is the future? Do I start a business? Do I sell my business? They don't want my gotcha moment with the mayor or the premier or the MEC. They want information. And so there are answers that I may feel I want because I'm also a citizen and I'm incensed by this or that. I'm indignant. How dare you? Does that serve my audience? Does that serve my listener? Sometimes not.
And also by getting the answers without trying to put the person down, even though they, in my opinion, often deserve it, you're providing the information which then enables people to make those decisions. And also, it doesn't matter how educated or uneducated you are, as an audience member, you're not stupid. You know when a former mayor really doesn't know what he's talking about, or a minister of this, or a whatever of that. So I think you're quite right. You're there to provide the information from which people can then make their own minds up.
And decisions that impact their lives in very real ways.
And I think that's why you work so well on a corporate stage or on the radio. And I don't think you're doing carte blanche at the moment, but that's very time consuming, as we now know. And we love seeing you and hearing you, and don't stop soon.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you.